Hi, friends. Welcome to the Do Life podcast. I'm your host, life coach Layla. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about vulnerability. Now, why? Where do I start? Let's see. The biggest misconception about vulnerability is that it's considered a sign of weakness, when in fact it couldn't be further from the truth. To be vulnerable is probably one of the strongest things that you can do. Being vulnerable is actually a powerful tool for growth and connection. To be vulnerable is to be real. Let's see. How about, if you like my content, please like, share, subscribe, leave comments and reviews on the podcast and the YouTube channel to help growth. I am just going to leave this shameless plug right here in the middle. So hit the notification button, do all the things. You know the deal. You know the drill. What is vulnerability? Vulnerability, the Latin translation means to wound. Oof. So I want to say that being vulnerable is not my strong suit. So I feel very imposter syndrome-y today, having this conversation with you. If I seem a little awkward, it's because I'm having a really difficult time preaching to you how to be less vulnerable and how to embrace vulnerability, because boy, do I struggle with that. So I feel very hypocritical saying these things to you, but this is something that I'm struggling with and working on and getting better at. And maybe we can do this collectively and tap into the energies of each other and use that as strength. So to wound is the definition. And boy, does that resonate. I want to read Brene Brown's definition of vulnerability, because I think she covers it so beautifully and eloquently. And I love the research that she's done. And she makes a lot of really good, strong points about being vulnerable. So Brene Brown describes it as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Oof, let's sit on that for a second. Emotional exposure. So many people have a fear of being seen in general. I was one of those people, and I got a message from... So I don't know how to explain this without sounding super woo-woo, but I get messages from the universe, and they show up multiple times. So in like a 2 or 3 day time frame, I had the message of don't be afraid to be seen show up 4 different times. I had 2 tarot readings that actually said I need to be seen. I listened to a lecture, a live lecture, a person on stage talking, saying don't be afraid to be seen in his speech to hundreds of people. And then there were just lots of little things that just showed up that repeated the same message. And I don't know how else to explain that other than guidance from the universe or the higher power, whatever you want to believe in. It's hard for me to ignore that when I'm presented with it multiple times in many different ways. So I knew it was time to get over my fear of being seen. And to do that, I wanted to do a deep dive. Like, what was the worst thing that could happen? Why was I so afraid of being seen? And it wasn't seeing me and who I am. That's never really been a problem. But the emotional exposure is what makes me cringe, because that is, in my personal opinion, where we are most vulnerable is our emotional vulnerability. To put ourselves out there, to give that part of ourselves to somebody else, is opening ourselves wide up for hurt and injury. And there's a lot of things that have happened in my past, and probably a lot of your past, that make it harder and harder to open up emotionally. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I just wanted to sit with that for a second, that risk of emotional exposure. What does that feel like to you? Because it resonates hard with me. So she also goes on to say, to be vulnerable means to risk being easily hurt or attacked. And that doesn't necessarily have to just be on an emotional level. If you think about seniors in high school will pick on freshmen because they're vulnerable and weak in a not necessarily emotionally state, but physically, emotionally, mentally. It's a combination of things, but I feel like that could resonate in multiple ways. And like I said a minute ago, to be vulnerable, to open up is to risk being hurt. And many of us have been hurt in the past. To open up and be vulnerable leaves us at risk for judgment. And a lot of times we fear opening up to people because we risk being judged. We fear opening up to people because we've been hurt in the past and we don't want to take the risk. We are pre-programmed to need our community, and opening up possesses the risk of being judged, being rejected, being hurt, alienated, excommunicated, made fun of. Did I say rejection? Because that's a big one. It also directly affects our self-esteem and our confidence level. So it's just a big bundle of blah. So it's understandable why so many people don't want to open up and be vulnerable. So before we get into how to overcome vulnerability, let's get into the science behind it and what happens when you actually are vulnerable. So a good thing that happens is when you are vulnerable and you open up to someone in a safe, stable environment, it releases the love hormone, also known as oxytocin, however you say it, whatever, your oxy. And when that hormone is released, it helps you build stronger bonds, deep, meaningful, emotional connections. It can help reduce stress and anxiety. Again, if it's in a safe, stable environment. If you open up to someone in a not safe, stable environment, the opposite happens. We'll talk about that in a sec. So putting yourself in a vulnerable position can open you up for a greater sense of confidence, a greater belief in your ability to trust your own judgment and to handle obstacles in common situations, amongst many other things. It will also lead to a greater trust and understanding in oneself. So imagine being able to trust yourself more. How many of us don't trust ourselves? We don't trust our decision-making skills. We have buyer's remorse, pre-buyer's remorse, unbuyer's remorse, all those things that you hear all the time because we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust our judgment. We don't trust our decision-making skills. And I know a lot of very successful people, and they are a 3-second rule. Like, there's a question, they have an answer within 3 seconds because they don't want their thought process to overcome their intuition and their gut instincts or whatever it is that they're relying on, because they know that their thoughts aren't necessarily always in their best interest, which is sad, but unfortunately true. And like I said earlier, I am not great with being vulnerable, and it really it really comes down to my trust issues. Not so much with me as it is with other people, but I guess you could say I don't trust myself to open up to the right people. I don't know. I don't know who I don't trust. Is it them or me? A combination or both? Because I feel like I really do trust myself for the most part, and I trust myself to make good decisions. And I really think it's just a deep-seated, like, I know for a fact when I was younger, my mom always told me that you can trust everybody 99.9% of the time. She says, don't ever put full trust and faith in anybody. And that's terrible. I really wish that she wouldn't have ingrained that into my brain as a small child, because as an adult, I still struggle with that. I know I've said this before, but the first 7 years of your life, your brain is in like a constant theta stage. So everything that everybody says and does is just programming you to, like, our brains are just computers, and those are the programs that are being installed in the initial phase. So here we are many years later, still running on those old programs, and to try to defrag and update and do new programming, not always compatible with the old software. So there's just, it's problems. But anyway, being aware, if you know what the virus is and where the virus is, it's easier to attack it and get rid of it, even if it's still a problem. And I'm saying all this to say that I think because of that belief system that was instilled in me as a small child, that I don't want to rely on anybody. I don't want to have to trust anybody. I don't feel like I need to open up to anybody and be vulnerable to them. And I've always been the strong one. Like, everybody opens up to me and is vulnerable to me. And while I appreciate that, and it does make for stronger bonds and emotional connection, because I feel grateful that they trust me with their information, and they can. I got in a fight with a girl in high school who told me all of her deep, dark secrets, and then she blabbed my secrets, which may have something to do with my trust issues and opening up to people. But anyway, she blabbed all of my secrets. We physically fought, and I never, ever shared any of her secrets to anybody, even to this day, because her telling my secrets shows who she is as a person, and me not telling her secrets and just taking it out on her physically shows who I was as a person. The only part of that I've kept is my ability to remain truthful. And so I have a lot of people's secrets that I really wish I didn't have, because I take great pride in integrity of being that person and being somebody that people can trust and confide in. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I became a life coach, a personal development coach, because people open up to me and they tell me things not even aware that they do. You know, I've had so many people tell me that I've never shared this with anybody, and it was just so easy for me to tell you. And I've never in a million years thought I would ever say this to anybody. And I'm just like, I have that, you know? and I take pride in that. Like, that makes me feel good. And again, I do appreciate that. And I do form stronger bonds with the people who open up to me. And I wish that I could open up to them. And part of me feels like if I do, I'll be seen as weak. Hence the whole idea of this episode. And I know it's not weak. It actually, it is the opposite. It takes great strength to be vulnerable. And I'm not that strong. I'm working on it. And I'm telling you how to work on it too. So we're going to work on it together. But this reminds me of a situation where I was a strong, independent woman. I don't need no man, right? And when my daughter moved out, she had a fireplace entertainment system in her bedroom, and it's a corner unit, and it would fit perfectly in this area in my basement. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and move that. And I was fighting with my spouse at the time, so I was like, you know, I don't need him for anything. And I decided I was going to move this big, huge, heavy entertainment center from all the way across the house to down the stairs to down the basement to where I wanted it. And I did a really good job. I didn't make a lot of noise. My spouse was sleeping at the time, and I managed to get it out of her room, down the hallway, and not make a sound. The problem was when I got halfway down the stairs, like I got maybe 4 or 5 steps down to the point where the whole entertainment center was coming with me, and then the top of it was stuck on that top stair. And so I was at a point where I couldn't move back up the stairs, and I couldn't go down the stairs because it was stuck, and I didn't want to break it, and I didn't want it to fall, and I didn't want to let it go, and I didn't want to drop it. And I stood there way longer than I needed to on the stairs, trying to come up with a solution, trying to reconfigure this thought process. Like, how am I going to get this down the stairs? I don't want to take it back up the stairs. And I thought a lot longer than I really want to admit that I did, because I didn't want to call my husband to help. And then eventually I did. And he came and he picked up the end and got it unstuck, and we carried it downstairs, and it took like 4 seconds. It was ridiculous how easy it was to just ask for help. And I feel like that was probably the most vulnerable that I've been, because it's really hard for me to admit when I need help with something. And that was really difficult, especially because I was mad at him, and my pride and my ego was trying to win that battle. And we got downstairs, and we talked about it. He laughed at me and was like, why would you do that? Why, I'm right here. Why didn't you ask me for help? And I told him I didn't want to. And And we had a whole conversation about it. Now, he said something that really opened my eyes. I told him that I didn't want to have help and ask for help, and that I didn't like that thought process. And he told me that it really made him feel sad that I didn't want to ask him to help me, and that he wanted to be available for me and help me with anything and everything. And, we had this whole conversation about it. And I realized that me asking for help, yes, is vulnerable, but it's also not being seen as weak and incapable of doing something. It was actually more so giving him the opportunity to do something for me and to help me, because I'm so independent, like hyper independent. He doesn't have many opportunities where he can help me and do the things. And I was taking that away from him. So I don't know why I went in this big whole tangent. But I felt like the story was relevant because, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, but asking for help is a sign of vulnerability and opening up. And definitely somebody who's hyper independent like me would struggle with. When you open up to somebody, you form deeper bonds with them. Vulnerability is directly related to resilience. When you choose to be vulnerable, you're choosing to risk being seen, being emotionally exposed, being seen as weak. And when you choose to do that, you're opening up a door to be rejected, to fail. And doing it anyway builds your confidence, builds your resilience, it builds your trust in yourself, like we said. And it also leads to greater courage. Like, it takes courage and strength to be vulnerable. And I'm just going to keep repeating that because I'm trying to instill it in my brain and also your brain. So what does it take to be vulnerable? Like, how can we be more vulnerable? How can we be more aware of being vulnerable and choosing specifically? So first of all, baby steps. I don't want you to just run out of here and go tell the first stranger you see your life story. That is the wrong thing to do. That is not what I'm saying to do at all. Please don't do that. Just don't. So start small, like admitting you need help with something. This is a big one, but it's also stupidly easy. I spent 40 minutes dragging an entertainment center down the house, through the house and down the stairs when it took less than 2 minutes to get somebody to help me. How much time are you wasting by trying to prove something to nobody instead of just asking somebody for help? I feel like as hard as that is for some of us to do, it's the most rewarding and could be the most easy to just say, hey, I don't have the time to finish this. Can you help me? Or, hey, I'm really struggling with this. It's taken me a lot longer than I'd like. Maybe another set of eyes could help me get this done faster. Or, hey, let's divide and conquer. You do this, I'll do this. And then I can get done faster and we can do this together. Something like that. So start small, baby steps. Ask for help from someone who's not going to belittle you or make you feel smaller or less than because you're asking for help. Ask for help from someone who should and will actually help you. Someone who wants to help you. Someone who wants to feel appreciated or loves to give to other people. I know so many people that are so giving. And again, in the situation of me in the stairs, me not asking for help took away his ability to help me, which is something that he gains pleasure from, like not in any kind of dirty way, but like he genuinely feels good about helping me and he wants to do things for me and other people and anybody he actually cares about. That's his thing. He would help anybody on the planet who needs help and would ask him to. And for us not to ask for help, we're taking that away from them, and that's not fair. That's not fair for us to do. And if that's the thought process that you need to keep in the back of your head that helps you, that makes it okay for you to ask for help, then then you have that. That's right there. That's for you. You're welcome. Anyway, another baby step you can take would be to tell a partner or a friend when they've upset you. And I know this doesn't sound like a baby step to some of us, because that sounds like the most daunting, dreadful thing in the world, is to admit that somebody's hurt our feelings in any kind of way. But it doesn't have to be as drawn out as that. I like to phrase things when people say something to me that I find hurtful or offensive. I've tried really hard to respond and not react. And my way to do that is, if I am presented with something I want to react to, I respond with a question for more clarity. So I'll say things like, did you mean to say that like that? Or why did you think that was a good thing to say or do? Or, just something non-confrontational. The old me would have been like, who the F do you think you're talking to? We don't do that anymore. My new phrase is, help me understand why you thought it was okay to say that to me. So direct and to the point, but non-combative. And you're putting that back on the other person, because before they would say something and it would trigger me and I would react aggressively. And then that opened the door for them to be aggressive right back, which is ultimately what they wanted. So now when I place that back on them and say things like, why did you think it was okay to say that to me? It's not as combative. It's not aggressive. It's genuinely inquisitive. And now they have to own up to their actions or their words and be like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Or, well, actually, and, we go from there. But whatever. What I'm saying is, if you want to form a deeper bond with someone, you should be able to open up to them and say things like, did you mean to say that in that tone? Or even just, did you mean to say it that way? Did you mean to say that? Because a lot of times people will say things and they don't realize that it's a hurtful manner. Like, my spouse was always saying just things, but he doesn't understand his tone. So I would be like, did you mean to say that like that? And 90% of the time he'd be like, no, blah, 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 blah. And it wasn't like he was backpedaling like, oh, no, I didn't mean to say that like that or whatever. No, it was just legit, like, he doesn't know his tone. And he's like, oh, yeah, no, I totally meant like this. And I'm like, oh, okay, because that's different. And how I respond directly relates to how you meant it. So basically, like, if you can open up to someone and just say something like, if you're not good at answering with questions, you can say something along the lines of, hey, that didn't sit well with me. Did I take that wrong? Or, I don't know why, whatever you just said really triggered me. Do you mind if we talk about that? Can we have a conversation about that? Again, if it's someone that you want to have a deep, meaningful relationship, you need to be able to open up to them and be authentic and be true and be yourself. Again, these are baby steps. So little things like, hey, I don't know why that was so triggering. Can we process that for a second? Can we talk about this? If you're in good company with someone who has the same thought process with you and wants to maintain a healthy relationship, then this should be easy for both of you after a couple times, maybe. Which brings me to the next thought, which is being mindful. How do you be mindful of being vulnerable? Like, that's such a weird thing, right? Usually if we're vulnerable, we're very aware of the fact that we're being vulnerable because we feel all the feels, right? So in order to be vulnerable on purpose, we need to pay attention to where we're holding back. When are we holding back? When are we not being authentic? Where are we staying silent in places that we should be speaking up? Next week's episode is going to be on setting healthy boundaries. And I think this is a good time to mention that, because I feel like that is something that a lot of people struggle with. And it's maybe not so much setting the boundaries as it is making sure the people around them are respectful of the boundaries and knowing when to walk away. If I set a boundary and you don't follow it, that's a you problem, not a me problem. If I set a boundary and I don't follow it, that's a me problem. that's next week's episode. So there's a little teaser for you. I think this is like one of the first teasers I've ever actually given on what next week's episode's going to be. So secrets. Anyway, so baby steps, see where you're holding back and not being authentic, not being true to yourself. If you have a problem speaking up and opening up, maybe you need to reflect that relationship. Is this somebody that you really want to be around? If you can't trust yourself to have open, meaningful conversations with them, do you really have a deep bond? Is it really the bond that you think you have? Or are they just bonded with the surface level you and not the real you? If you want to have real connections with people, you need to have real conversations with them. And being vulnerable helps facilitate that. Another little baby step you can take is sharing your story. It doesn't have to be your life story. It doesn't have to be your whole story. It could just be a small portion of your story, something that you struggle with. And, I've shared a handful of stories with you throughout the episodes, and even this one, that I would consider opening up and being vulnerable. But if you can take one aspect of your life and share it with someone, getting it out there helps you get a better idea of who you are and what your story is and what you've overcome and what you're capable of. So the more you share your story, the more you see yourself, and the less vulnerable you feel when you do. So that's a little baby step you can take. And last but not least, definitely not least, is admitting that you're wrong. Ugh. I hate it. Just kidding. No. Is admitting that you don't know something. I hate it. Again, I am doing a podcast because I know so much. It's not because I know so much. It's because I learn so much. And I learn all the things, and then I want to share all the information. I don't pretend to know all of these things all the time. A lot of times I get excited about something, I learn something, and then I learn something new and it goes away. So that's why I wanted to do the podcast, maybe not just for you, but for me too, because I can go back and rewatch it and be like, oh yeah, I remember that thing. Cool, I almost forgot about it. Anyway, the point I'm making is admitting that you don't know something is to be vulnerable. And so I worked in sales for 20 years. I've sold everything. And I used to hate not knowing. And when people would ask me a question I didn't know, I would make something up. And sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong. And when I was wrong, it usually didn't end well, and I didn't make the sale. And then I got in trouble for lying about something because I was selling cell phones and everything was contractual and it was a whole thing, and I messed something up and I couldn't fix it. And I got reprimanded for that, as I should have. Again, we're not that person anymore. We've grown and we've changed. But what happened from that is I learned to say, I don't know, let me find out. And when I tell you that my sales skyrocketed after I learned how to say, I don't know, it's ridiculous. Because what happened was I was showing vulnerability to my clients, which then formed a deeper bond with my clients, which then enticed them to buy from me because they trusted me. Even if the answer to the question wasn't favorable, 90% of the time I still made the sale because I opened up that little tiny bit of vulnerability and honesty and just said, I don't know, let me find out. They trusted me and we had a bond and a connection, and it made a world of difference. And I realized that that was the kind of salesperson that I wanted to be. I didn't want to be the sleazy, money-driven, hungry, greedy salesperson that some of the people around me were, and were making me feel bad because I wasn't. So I was doing the things, again, peer pressure, trying to keep up with them and do the things they were doing. And then when I realized that that's not who I am and who I wanted to be, and that made me feel gross and icky inside, and I did what resonated with me, which was be honest, and then my skills, and then my sales doubled and tripled, and I was blowing their numbers out of the water by being true and being me. And they were like, what are you doing? And I was like, being honest. You should try it sometime. Anyway, I don't know why I'm rambling on about this. Oh, because admitting that you don't know something is a sign of vulnerability, and it's an easy baby step to practice, and just say, I don't know. Seems so simple, but yet it's not. And I want you to be mindful of next time you don't want to say the words, I don't know, and try it just to see what happens. Whew, that was a lot. Okay. So yeah, I challenge you to be vulnerable today, tomorrow, at least once in the next week. Be very mindful of where you're holding back and where you don't want to open up and say things, and do it anyway. And let me know what happens. I'd love to hear in the comments. If you'd like to go deeper, you can go to my website and schedule one-on-one calls. I would love to hear your stories and know more. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, do all the things. It helps me grow my channel. So to recap, we've talked about being vulnerable, the science behind it, why it's good for you, why it's not good for you, some baby steps and helpful ways to be more vulnerable, and the good things that happen when you become vulnerable on a regular basis. Right? Anyway, I truly appreciate you guys being here and watching the show and listening on the podcast. I love you guys, and let's go do life vulnerably. Bye.